I am Kelly Forden, and I'm thrilled to be here for the third season of Let's Deconstruct a Story. I'm also a bit giddy because the podcast is now being produced in collaboration with the Grosse Pointe Public Library in Michigan. The GPPL has committed to purchasing 10 books by each of these authors to give to their patrons. If you are a short story writer who has tried to make money in this game, then you know what a big deal that is. My hope is that other libraries will follow the GPPL's lead and be inspired to buy books by these talented short story writers. I'll be contacting many libraries this year to suggest it. Please feel free to do the same if you feel so inclined. Libraries need good books, and good books are written by writers who devote themselves to craft. A win-win in my estimation. I'm Kelly Forden, and I'm here today with Caitlin Horrocks, and we are going to be talking about her story on the Oregon Trail, which is in her new short story collection, Life Among the Terranauts. And welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk about this story because when I was thinking back on first reading the collection and reading the story in the collection, I remembered it as so much longer than it is. It's not very long at all.
I had remembered it longer, actually, when we went through. I mean, not terribly longer, but I had remembered it maybe being about 2,000 words, and it is closer to 1,000.
Yeah, and I guess I conflated the journey with the story and just thought it was a long story because it's a long journey out to Oregon. So this story dates back to 2009. Is this one of the first stories that you wrote in the collection?
Yes, this is one of the oldest stories in the book. And as I was thinking back to how it did start, I was at AWP 2008, and I was listening to a panel conversation on bending genre, and Andrew Munson gave a talk, and I do not remember what the talk was actually about, but I remember it was a great talk. It sort of got the wheels spinning, and I just had the idea of people sort of trapped in a game. If the characters were conscious on some level of their free will or lack thereof, and then the story that would have been the spring. I wrote the story that summer, like late summer would have been the first draft.
So you were thinking about a game. Was there a particular game that you had in mind?
I mean, I think for people who know more about video games, there would have been like a vast panoply to choose from. And certainly games that are, narratively complex and where characters do have an illusion of more choice or more complicated stories. I'm just not a gamer. I don't have that knowledge. Like my computer game, video game knowledge stops very early on. So I think that was how I ended up originally with Oregon Trail. It was just sort of one of the few games that I had spent a significant amount of time playing. And once I was working on it, though, I felt like it was a game where I could play with that idea, but that it also then, it is referencing real people. It's referencing a real historical phenomenon. So in that sense, it sort of fit the idea better maybe than a more complicated game.
So I'm not familiar with that game. Who was that game put out by? I'm sure my kids, if they were listening to this, would be horrified. I'm sure they know the game. But
what game?
Oh, the Oregon Trail. I mean, is there an actual game called the Oregon Trail?
Yes.
Okay. And I didn't even know that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I've never been down to the basement where they're always playing. No. I literally just walk away every time someone turns on a game. So tell me a little bit about the game. Does it really give you all this information, like what you need to bring on the trail, what you might have to kill on the trail, all that stuff?
Absolutely. Yes. So this is fantastic because I honestly assumed the audience for this story, like from the get-go, from the first draft, I assumed the audience was going to be limited to people who knew the game. And I was just sort of bargaining that this was a game that was so ubiquitous for a chunk of the 80s and 90s. It existed in a bunch of different editions. It was like a staple of elementary school computer labs, when the technology was sort of primitive enough that it was like siloed in a room where you would go a few times a week and like to use the computers. This was like one of the handful of games that we would play. It was one of the handful of games that like I ever had. I didn't even have it at home. I had on the Amazon trail at home, which is a very similar game, but you're in the Amazon. I felt that I was sort of bargaining that for this story to have any readership, I would just be depending on that sort of swath of people of approximately the right age who would have encountered the game. And I never knew if it would mean anything to anyone who hadn't already encountered the game. And for that reason, I kept waiting for it to get cut from the book. I was like, it is a matter of time. And then someone is going to flag this weird story and it is going to come out of the book. And my editor did at one point send an email where he was like, I had not heard of this game. I didn't know what it was. I went to ask my wife about it. She looked at me like I had three heads because like, who hasn't heard of this game? And sort of assured me like enough people, I guess sort of two things, like he received reassurance from others that enough people would know the game, that it could work. And that the story for him had worked already, even without him being conversant for the game. But I'm totally curious to like what the experience of the story is like if you don't know the game.
Well, I think that's so incredible because I had no idea. And I was like, oh, she's doing this incredible riff off of the actual, trip along the Oregon Trail, or you were just making it into some sort of sci-fi experience. I mean, we're maybe like a decade apart in age, and I guess I missed it. I mean, I was more, early 80s kind of era, and we didn't have the game. So, I mean, at least at my school, they didn't have the game. I'd never heard of the game. So I was just literally thinking, oh my gosh, she has superimposed these people on the actual Oregon Trail. And I have all these questions here about like, and how did you do the research? And how did you know what they were going to eat? And so all of these things about like the clothes and, like what they're shooting in different areas, all of that is available on the game, basically. Like,
yes.
So, I thought it was brilliant. And I was like, oh my God, who would ever think of this? Because then I started thinking about Manifest Destiny. And I guess before I say what I was thinking about Manifest Destiny, what did you think a lot about that concept when you were writing this story?
Yes. It is, the story is riffing on like the actual Oregon Trail, just it's riffing on it by way of the game, the Oregon Trail. And I had played for a while with like adding like a little like I had played with like how obvious can I make it or should I make it right, within the story that I am referencing something else other than the historical trail. So I think in a very early draft, I'd added like a little trademark symbol or something like by the name of the game. This one, the acknowledgements, I give credit to I think the Minnesota Educational Consortium, which was actually the original publisher of the game. I was certainly, yes, thinking about Manifest Destiny. And in the context of the game, you can't ever turn around. You can't, even as like your children are all dying and you're starving to death and your oxen are kind of dying one by one and you have dysentery for like the 20th time. There is no moment at which you can say, never mind, I would like to turn around. There is no moment where you ever kind of pause. You do. As you arrive at the different kind of way stations, there will be like little snippets of history of what that place is. But certainly none of it ever encourages I think, the student or the player to think critically or skeptically or cynically about this progress. It's you can only go one direction, and that is the correct direction to go to settle the West. And then once you're there, I mean, the goal is just to have made it. And then you do get sort of bonus points if you make it there with more supplies or more money. Kind of crawling to the end on your hands and knees does not earn you optimum points. But it's very much about going and settling and making it, which is, I mean, it's a game, but is certainly such a reductive way of looking at such a hugely complicated question.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was familiar with Manifest Destiny. The idea that the United States is destined by God, its advocates believed, to expand its dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. There are three basic themes to Manifest Destiny: the special virtues of the American people and their institutions, the mission of the United States to redeem and remake the West in the image of the agrarian East, an irresistible destiny to accomplish this essential duty. And so that's where I got stuck, this irresistible destiny. And I was like, and honestly, I mean, that's cool that you were basing it on a game, but not knowing that made it such a rich experience for me, because I was like, of course, this is what we always do as Americans. We barge ahead. It's our manifest destiny. God has willed it. And who cares if we've lost kids and cows and, you know, whatever else we brought with us. And it just made it really powerful as a reader for me. So, oh, well,
I know that's great to hear. And I mean, I think that would have been my dream for the story that I wouldn't have quite allowed myself to have. That absolutely, I was thinking about that definition or those questions, and I was hoping the story spoke to that. But I was thinking the things like, you know, cheesy pizza tombstones would be such a distraction or absolute befuddlement if you didn't know the game, that I wasn't sure that other sort of seed would survive. So it's great that it does.
Well, I just thought that was your unique sense of humor, and I thought I guess I wasn't really able to unpack that. I wasn't really clear on it, but I just thought it was a way of adding humor to this horrific, and it added humor to that part about nothing will turn us back, like we're just going to keep going no matter what. So, I mean, there's a lot of things about green also, and I don't know if you meant to put in all these references to green in the story, but there's the Green River. So they cross, there's a lot of time spent at the Green River, which is the river in the Western United States, rising on the Continental Divide in the Wind River Range in West Central Wyoming. And then at the end of the story, in the last paragraph, it says, well, she's talking about how Elias had talked about Shakespeare. And then he had recited me love sonnets once back in Illinois when we were young and green, greener than grass, greener than the treetops in the damp Willamette. The valley spread beneath me when I finally made Oregon, greener than this, God, I thought. What were we thinking and why did you make us? What business did a banker have shooting bears? Which is funny. But there's a lot about being green. And so when I was reading it, I was thinking, well, that is how people go into these ventures that might be ill-advised, right? You don't have the experience and you just are green. But did you mean any of that? Or is there a lot of green in the game?
No, I mean, the original version of the game has very few colors. It's a very sort of Generation 1.0 computer game. The Green River was an accident of geography. I mean, that's where you go. But the sort of cascade of green references at the end of the story, I was looking for a way to end it. I was sort of deep in my conceit. We had gone along the trail. I had made references to kind of the things that I wanted to maybe poke a little fun at or use from the game. And I knew that the progression of the story was very fixed. And would have been even without the game, even if I was just referencing the trail. So there was the sort of, either they're going to make it or they're not. And if they do make it, in what condition or how do they feel about it? Or does the story extend beyond that moment of arrival? And there was an earlier version where it was always a disaster. I think our narrator was the only one who ever made it to Oregon. But there was a version where I felt like I at least had to kind of like reference what was ahead for her, or just what the next stages of her life might look like. And I think I ended up sort of deciding that was unnecessary, that I wanted this to be a pretty, I didn't want the conceit to kind of wear out its welcome. I didn't want to just get it sort of weird and then more weird and then more weird and more weird. But I wanted it to have a heart. I didn't want it to be just this sort of weird, absurdist jaunt that just comes to an end. But I wanted it to end instead of just stop, I guess is maybe another way to make that distinction. But if I wasn't going to keep talking about her life or develop her all of a sudden much more as a character than she had been up to that point, I was looking for what the ending beat could be, and was just kind of writing my way into the flies to wanton boys, and that brief memory, the brief reference to being so green, and then this sense of green is the thing at the end of the journey that she's supposed to be so grateful for, and it's so insufficient. She's made it across the plains and the mountains and the snow and the rivers, and she has this lush landscape before her, but at this sort of ridiculous, catastrophic cost. And I was hoping that the green references and some of the language in that last paragraph could do, I hoped, a lot of work there at the end.
It definitely does. And I should have caught on that it was a game, because when they get to the general store in Fort Laramie, and the trader says, "Why did you kill so much?" And, I guess it was very poignant, because I thought, wow, would there have been that kind of waste along the trail? Of course, you'd be afraid you were going to starve, so you would kill a lot, and then it would rot. And, that also seemed indicative of what we as Americans often do, take more than we need because we're, stealing ourselves for some, catastrophe. But, and what was the other thing I was going to bring? Oh, so then how did you bring in the Shakespeare quote, which, like flies to wanton boys, are we to the gods? Elias said, they kill us for their sport. Would that have been in the game too? Or did you just bring, it was from...
There's definitely no Shakespeare references.
Okay. I was like,
not in that game. The dialogue in the original is very stripped down. I was like, would you like a wagon accent?
Right.
Yes. And then you check yes, no.
Yeah. Like 4 pigs.
Yeah. But as I was thinking about just the experience of, playing a game, which you can, and so this can go back to the meat and the spoilage, and certainly the settling of the West was full of a squandering of resources, or of taking beyond what could even be used. But likewise, in an elementary school computer lab, you would have lots of people where every time you would have the kids be like, I select hunting. And then as long as you had the bullets, which you did, they were a finite resource, you had to trade for them or buy them. But you could just, hit like your and kill as many things as you could see. And then you would hit a point where it's like, you have killed, X number of pounds of meat. You could only carry X number of pounds of meat to your wagon. And then you could do that subtraction in your head and know that you had just slaughtered a thoroughly unnecessary number of living creatures in the game. And you could care about that or not. Obviously they're not real. But there are ways in which the game, I sound like I'm sort of maybe mocking it or wishing it had been more complex, but I think it does convey certain lessons about like the misery of the journey, and in moments like that where you're just kind of out there killing things, and have made a choice that it sets you back on the trail. So that's a decision you have to make if you're going to hunt or not. You are not making progress that day towards your destination. It's a mini moment of moral reckoning about like how many buffalo you've killed in that moment. And then also, there's certainly moments where, kids, just as kids screwing around, like you can set your rations to meager and your pace to grueling and kind of watch your people like drop off one by one. And this, the sort of the misery or the torture that a game allows you to create for these people it was memorable to me. And as I was sort of creating the story and thinking about the game experience and then also the writing experience, of course, as fiction writers, we create these people, we cast them into unpleasant situations, we have them make mistakes. I certainly hope that like nothing I have ever written feels gratuitously, cruel, or manipulative in a mean way or a mocking way or an unempathetic way. But both a game and a story are these acts of intense manipulation. And I was definitely making some of those connections in my head when I got to the fly reference.
Yeah, so I looked that up because I wasn't familiar with it. And it's just interesting what they say about King Lear, Act 4, Scene 1. Perhaps the most desperate lines in a desperate play. The Duke of Gloucester's speech culminates scene after scene of abject cruelty and senseless brutality. For the kindness he has shown the disgraced King Lear on a stormy night, Gloucester has been blinded by two of the king's enemies. Lear's daughter Regan and her husband Gloucester, like Lear, has had to face up to cruel revelations. The son he thought treacherous, Edgar, has proved innocent, but only after Gloucester drove him out, on and on and on. It's just, in the end, it says, the Duke sums up his revelation in two of the most memorable lines in Shakespeare, likening the gods to immature, uncaring, unjust children, and man to insignificant flies, creatures subject to sportful cruelty. And like, what a metaphor for gaming, too. Like there you have actual children, who are like gods, playing the game. And who cares whether everybody drops off? It's as immaterial to a kid playing a game, whether, everybody dies on the trail as it would be to like the gods. If we died, I don't know. I thought it was very cool. So I thought it was really cool if it was the actual Oregon Trail. And now that I know it's a game, it adds another layer too. So
that might also be, we never had, I never had like a video game system at home. So I would be the kid who would go to a sleepover at someone else's house and like, they're all playing just like Mario Kart or something. And I don't know how to play. I'm terrible. I'm like, my whole body's like jerking to and fro as I try and like steer my car. And then I crash my car right away. And I think I would just maybe like, I felt embarrassed, but then I think I maybe also felt like, oh no, I crashed my car and this is my one car, my one chance, versus having a different relationship with games. That might be showing up there a little bit.
Yeah. Like if that's your one shot to play, it means a little bit more than the guy who's playing 12 hours a day, like my son, but no. So how does it, so you mentioned in the beginning, because we met before and we recorded a discussion of Chance Me, which is a much longer story in your collection, 6,000 words. And I thought maybe on this blog, I would post my annotation of that just so people have a reference, with the two stories, since I did that one as well. But I just was curious, like when you were putting the collection together, how you thought this one would fit, among the rest. I mean, I know you said the editor was like, but in your mind, what part did this play in the collection, this story?
Sure. And before I answer that, I'm realizing there's a quote from it's not Shakespeare, it's John Webster, the Duchess of Malfi, that I never have ever had the chance to reference ever in my life, but my time is now. and it's stuck in my head forever, because it's like, it's like he's trying to do the Shakespeare quote. It's like, it's exactly as flies to wanton boys, only not as good. And it's, we are merely the stars' tennis balls, struck and bandied, which way please them.
I love that. Oh, that is it. That is it.
Like, there's as flies to wanton boys, and then there's like, we are the stars' tennis balls.
That is fantastic. I love it. Another game.
So, John Webster. Okay, good try. Good try. So the place of the story in the collection, I certainly, there are other stories with some oddities or a little bit of magic or strangeness in the premise. I mean, there's a town that decides to hibernate all winter. There's people trapped inside a biosphere. I didn't think that this sort of weird take on the Oregon Trail was completely out of voice with the rest of the book. But because I was worried about, who the audience was or in what ways it would make sense to different readers. I think the thing that reaffirmed for me that it should be in the book is that it seemed to be thinking about some of those themes that do show up, like in the town where the people hibernate. It's a town that was settled in the upper Midwest. Its boom days are behind it. And what is still keeping people there? I mean, beyond that initial arrival, beyond what economic resources seem to be there when some of those are played out or when the world is shifting, what keeps people in these certain places where they've arrived. I had generations of my mother's family they had emigrated and then just stayed in this like really tiny, unassuming town in Kansas. And I was there one summer, just kind of like, why here? Like, why stop and why stay? And then why leave ultimately? And that set of questions seem to be popping up in several of the stories, including this one. So that even though it was a little bit weirder than most of the stories, it felt like it fit with the other stories in the collection.
I think definitely. And I wish I had the book in front of me, because I was thinking about the story where they hibernate all year. What's that one called?
The Sleep.
The Sleep. Yeah, exactly. That seems to be running through that story as well, for sure. So what are you working on now? Are you working on a novel or more stories?
Right now, I like survival.
Yeah, with 3 small children.
Yes. I mean, I've got 3 little kids who are just constantly bouncing in and out of school and daycare with illnesses that all require like a negative COVID test before they go back. I'm just trying to get my grading done for my teaching job. This moment in my life has not allowed a lot of time for writing, which I miss dearly. I have what I think is the start of a novel. I have story ideas bouncing around too. I pretty much always have story ideas bouncing around, but I am cautiously hopeful. I'm starting to do some research for what I think will be a novel.
Great. Okay. And then just a last question. Well, I have 2 last questions. One is, was there anything you wanted to talk about this story that I missed? The Oregon Trail story.
A question for you, I guess, as someone who didn't know the game. What did you make of all the sort of various like constraints? Like they have X number of pounds of food or like X amount of money. Like X.
Okay, well, right. Well, so I have all these questions like, did you do a lot of research here? How did you know? Was $1,600 a tremendous amount of money? And, how did you know how much it was to cross on the ferry, and ridiculous things now I'm just sort of embarrassed about. But I think all of that, I was like, oh, well, she just researched that. That's how. And then I really bought into, I just have one of those imaginations that just goes. So I was like, it's manifest destiny. They have to go, so they must keep going. And that, they felt like I've been around enough people who think God is motivating all of their behavior, that I was like, okay, well, if God says go, and so that the one question, I just thought that you put the tombstones in for fun. I mean, I was like, that's kind of cute, it made it more modern day. And I guess I was thinking that I alternately was thinking, well, this is a new Oregon Trail. This is like in the future. And, we're having to go again for whatever reason. Maybe it's climate change. And so these kids are completely unprepared. So that's where I thought it was heading, because, most of the tombstones are in the beginning of the story. So that's where I was still thinking, we're in the future and the world, is collapsing, and it's like Station 11, So I guess you had a good reader in me, because I just go with it. And I'm willing to take the ride. I would be curious. It would be interesting to see if anybody listens to this and sends me a message saying, I didn't know what the game was either, and I had no idea, so I'll let you know. If someone
no, I had the best kind of reader. Worked that well.
I don't know about that, but I definitely went along with it.
And I am thinking, I mean, there were other games that tried to sort of build on the success of Oregon Trail. Like, I mean, as I said, like, I think as a kid, we had the Amazon Trail, and I think there was like the Yukon Trail, but none of them surpassed the original. And I think part of it is this, like in the Amazon one, you're supposed to be, you're out like looking for a plant that you need to like create a malaria medication, which is a perfectly fine, object for a quest. But I think there is something that kind of works especially well about this, just like unidirectional, like you have to keep moving in this way that our national narrative myth has these people moving forward.
We may be encoded with that, like we're all, the descendants of immigrants, and it may just have really, on a subconscious level, people connected with it, or game players connected with it, because that's what they, their ancestors did. Okay. And my last question was, do you have any advice for parents who are writers, parents of small children who are writers? Like, do you have how are you getting through it, I guess?
I'll go. So the writer Andrew Munson, who had given that talk during which I first conceived of the story, he has a kid, and I asked him once like how he continued being so productive, and he just looked at me and he said, "Daycare." And that was his one-word answer. That has proven accurate information. The other thing, it worked for my novel and has not been an option during COVID, was that I sort of finally realized all the kind of home spaces that had once worked for me were not working for me anymore. They were not productive spaces. So leaving my house, again, when there was like someone else to take care of my child, or somewhere else, leaving to go work in coffee shops and to find, rather than like beating myself up for not being productive in a certain space, just going to find a space and a place where I felt I could get work done, was critical to my surviving and finishing the novel, The Vexations. It has not been an option, during the pandemic so much. So I am still figuring out like what my writing life is going to look like or can look like now that I have 2 more children and are still kind of navigating this long, slow tail end of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unprecedented. That's why I wanted to ask you, because it just seems like everything that would have worked in the past can't work. You can't go anywhere, and often they can't go to school. So yeah, I guess journaling. But anyway, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And I'm going to also post the story, Chance Me, my annotation, and hopefully people will read both stories and listen to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for being such a generous reader and conversation partner.
Thank you.